I am a man of structure. As a structural engineer, my life is governed by load-bearing walls, tensile strength, and the absolute certainty of mathematics. If a column fails, there is a reason, a calculation error, a material defect, a shifting foundation. There are no ghosts in the blueprints. There is no magic in the mortar. That was the world I lived in until 3 months ago. That was the world before my 5-year-old son, Noah, looked at me with eyes that were ancient, tired, and terrified, and asked why the steam hadn't stopped screaming. It started with the water. Most children love bath time. It's a chaotic symphony of splashing water and rubber ducks. But for Noah, water was an enemy. Not just a dislike, but a visceral, trembling terror. If the water level rose above his ankles, he would hyperventilate, clutching the sides of the porcelain tub until his knuckles turned white. We thought it was a phase. My wife, Sarah, read parenting books about sensory processing disorders. I just thought he was being a kid. But then came the night of November 14th. It was raining, a heavy, relentless downpour that hammered against the roof of our suburban home in Seattle. The sound usually soothed me, but it seemed to electrify Noah. I was sitting in the living room, reviewing the schematics for a new bridge project, when I heard the scream. It wasn't the cry of a child waking from a bad dream. It was the guttural, desperate shout of a man in pain. I bolted up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. When I burst into Noah's room, the scene I found froze me in the doorway. Noah wasn't in his bed. He was standing in the center of the room, rigid, his small pajama-clad body trembling violently. The moonlight filtered through the blinds, casting slanted shadows across his face, shadows that looked like the bars of a cage. He was staring at the window, at the rain slicking the glass. "Noah?" I whispered, stepping forward, hands raised to soothe him. He turned to me. His eyes were wide, but they didn't seem to see me, his father. They looked through me. He brought a shaking hand to his throat, clawing at his skin as if something were tight around his neck. "The signal," he gasped, his voice raspy, an octave lower than it had any right to be. "The lever is stuck, Elias. The lever is rusted shut." He called me Elias. Not Dad. Not Daddy. He spoke my name with the familiarity of a colleague, or a stranger. "Noah, it's Daddy. You're having a nightmare," I said, reaching out to touch his shoulder. His skin was ice cold, clammy with sweat despite the central heating. He slapped my hand away. The force was shocking. "Don't touch me. The boiler is going to blow. Can't you hear the whistle? It's too loud." He covered his ears, dropping to his knees, curling into a ball on the rug. "Get the red flag. For God's sake, stop the 404. I knelt beside him, heart hammering against my ribs. The 404? What was he talking about? I pulled him into my arms, rocking him as he sobbed. He didn't smell like baby shampoo and lavender laundry detergent anymore. For a brief, terrifying second, the air around us didn't smell like a bedroom. It smelled of sulfur, burning coal, and the coppery tang of old blood. The smell vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving me wondering if I was the one losing my mind. The next morning, the behavior shifted from terrifying to bizarrely specific. Sarah was making pancakes, trying to keep the mood light after the night's episode. Noah sat at the kitchen table, drawing. Usually, he drew stick figures or lopsided houses. Today, he was using a black crayon, pressing down so hard the wax crumbled. I looked over his shoulder. He wasn't drawing a house. He was drawing a series of intersecting lines, intricate and deliberate. Tracks, railway tracks. "That's a nice train track, Bud," I said, pouring coffee, my hand shaking slightly. Noah didn't look up. "It's not just a track. It's the junction at York. But the angle is wrong." I paused, the coffee pot hovering midair. "York? We've never been to York, Noah. That's in England." "I know where it is," he muttered, adding a small box to the side of the tracks. "This is the signal box. I worked here. Before the fire." Sarah and I exchanged a look, that silent, terrified communication between parents when they realize they are in uncharted territory. You work there? Sarah asked gently, turning off the stove. Yes. Before I was Noah. He put the crayon down and looked at us with a solemnity that aged his face by 40 years. My name was Arthur. Arthur Penhaligon. And I need to know if the 404 stopped. Did they see my flag? I tried to rationalize it. Kids have active imaginations, I told myself. He probably saw a show on YouTube, Kids About Trains. But the name stuck with me. Arthur Penhaligon. It sounded too specific, too dull to be the invention of a 5-year-old who usually named his stuffed animals Mr. Fluffy. The breaking point of my skepticism, the first crack in the concrete foundation of my worldview, happened 3 days later. We took a drive to a flea market in a neighboring town, hoping to distract him. We were walking past the table cluttered with antique tools and junk. Noah, who usually ran towards the toy stalls, stopped dead in front of a crate filled with rusty metal parts. He reached in and pulled out a heavy, corroded piece of iron with a handle. To me, it looked like a piece of junk. A switch key, Noah whispered, holding it with a reverence that made my skin crawl. He didn't hold it like a child holds a toy. He held it like a worker holds his livelihood. He gripped it by the shaft, thumb resting perfectly on the worn groove of the handle. Put that down, Noah, it's dirty, I said. This opens the box, he said, looking at me. The locking mechanism on the Series 2 lever frames. You have to jiggle it to the left, or the pin won't catch. The owner of the stall, an elderly man with grease under his fingernails, looked up from his newspaper. He adjusted his glasses, peering at Noah. He's right, you know, the old man said, his voice raspy. That's a railway switch key from the late 30s. British make. And that bit about jiggling it left? That's a known quirk of the Series 2. How the hell does your boy know that? I looked at my son. He was standing there, 4 feet tall, wearing a Paw Patrol t-shirt, holding a piece of rusted history with the muscle memory of a veteran railwayman. I told you, Noah said softly, a tear leaking from his eye. I couldn't get the box open in time. The key jammed. The air in the market seemed to drop 10 degrees. I looked at the key, then at my son. The logic in my brain, the engineering principles I lived by, tried to find a solution. He guessed. Coincidence. But deep down, in the pit of my stomach where instinct lives, I knew. The stranger in my house wasn't imagining this. He was remembering it. The flea market incident was the spark. The weeks that followed were the inferno. If I was a man of science, my wife Sarah was a woman of empathy. She was a kindergarten teacher, used to the fluid, imaginative reality of children. But even she couldn't explain away the nights that followed. We stopped sleeping. Our bedroom became a triage center, waiting for the inevitable scream that would tear through the house at 3:14 a.m. Always 3:14 a.m. The consistency is what bothers me, I told Dr. Aris, our pediatrician, a week later. I was sitting in his sterile office, holding a cup of lukewarm water. Night terrors are usually random. These are scheduled. Dr. Aris nodded sympathetically, scribbling on his notepad. Trauma can manifest in cycles, Elias. Has Noah seen anything frightening on TV? A fire? An accident? No, I snapped, harsher than I intended. We don't watch the news. He watches cartoons about talking dogs. But at night? At night he talks about compression valves and steam pressure. Dr. Aris prescribed a mild sedative for Noah and suggested therapy. I took the prescription, but I never filled it. Because pills treat the symptoms, not the cause. And the cause was sitting in the back seat of my car, staring out the window with a look of profound, melancholic resignation. That Tuesday, the physical manifestations began. I was giving Noah a bath, sponge baths only now, standing up, because sitting in the water made him hysterical. I was washing his back when I saw it. On his left shoulder blade, extending up towards his neck, the skin was angry and red. It wasn't a rash. It looked like a port wine stain, but it was new. It had a jagged, irregular shape. "Does this hurt, buddy?" I asked, touching it gently. Noah flinched, his wet skin slipping under my fingers. "That's where the coal hit me," he whispered. I froze. "The coal?" He turned to look at me, naked and shivering, water dripping from his nose. "The tender exploded first, Elias. The shovel." I was holding the shovel. "The firebox blew out backwards. It burned through my jacket." He pointed to the red mark on his shoulder. "This is where the fire kissed me." I wrapped him in a towel immediately, my hands trembling so hard I could barely tuck the corners in. I carried him to his room and sat him on the bed. Sarah was in the doorway, her hand covering her mouth. She had heard. "Noah," I said, my voice steady only by sheer force of will. "You said your name was Arthur. Arthur Penhaligon." "Yes." "And you worked on a train?" "Not on the train. In the box. Signal box B. But I had to go down, the switch was jammed. I went down to the track to force the point. That's when the 404 came. The silver link. It was moving too fast. The brakes failed. I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the search bar. I didn't want to type it. Typing it made it real. Typing it acknowledged that my son was not just my son. "When?" I asked. "When did this happen, Noah?" He looked at the ceiling, his eyes tracking dust motes as if they were falling ash. "March," he said softly. "It was cold. There was frost on the sleepers. March 14th, 1948. March 14th, 1948. "And where?" "Winsford," he said. "Just south of the junction." "Winsford." I stood up. I felt sick. Nauseous. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. "Go to sleep, Noah." I walked out of the room, past Sarah, and went straight to my study. I locked the door. I sat in front of my computer, the glow of the monitor the only light in the room. I opened the browser. My fingers felt heavy, like lead. Search query: train crash Winsford 1948. The internet is a vast ocean of noise, but history is silent and precise. The results loaded instantly. Wikipedia, the Winsford rail accident. Date, April 17, 1948. Close. Noah said March 14th. A discrepancy? My heart leaped with hope. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe this was just a story. I clicked the link. Location: Winsford, Cheshire, England. Incident: a collision between a mail train and a passenger express. Cause: signalman error. A soldier pulled the emergency cord, stopping the train. The signalman thought the train had passed and cleared the line for the following express. I read on, scrolling frantically. There was no mention of an Arthur Penhaligon. No mention of a boiler explosion. "He's making it up," I whispered to the empty room, relief washing over me like cold water. "He got the date wrong. He's just a kid with a story." I was about to close the tab when I saw a footnote. A link to a scanned PDF of the original Ministry of Transport accident report from 1948. I downloaded it. The document was grainy, typed on a typewriter, stamps faded. I scrolled through the technical jargon. Bogie wheels, vacuum brakes, telescoping carriages. And then, on page 14, in the section detailing the fatalities of the crew. The driver of the express, deceased. The fireman of the express, deceased. Signalman on duty, A. Penhaligon. My breath hitched. Note: Signalman Penhaligon was not in the box at the time of impact. Witness statements suggest he had descended to the track level to inspect a faulty point mechanism. His body was recovered near the wreckage of the locomotive's firebox. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking loudly in the silence. The blood drained from my face. Signalman A. Penhaligon. But the date. Noah said March 14th. The accident was April 17th. I went back to the report. I zoomed in on the date of the inquiry. May 1948. I looked at the date of the accident again. April 17th. Why did Noah say March? I stood up and paced the room. I needed a cigarette, and I hadn't smoked in 10 years. I went to the bookshelf and pulled down an old atlas. I didn't know what I was looking for. Then I heard the door handle turn. It was Sarah. Elias, she whispered through the wood. He's talking again. He's asking for his sister. I opened the door. Sarah looked pale. He says his sister's name is Eleanor. He says he promised to bring her a doll from London. He's crying, Elias. He says he never made it home with the doll. I walked back into Noah's room. He was sitting up, clutching his knees. Eleanor is waiting by the gate, Noah said, his voice breaking. She's wearing the blue dress. Tell her I'm sorry. Noah, I said, kneeling before him, holding up my phone with the grainy accident report. You said March 14th. But the crash was in April. Why did you say March? Noah looked at the phone screen. He didn't read it. He couldn't read yet, not really. But he looked at the picture of the twisted metal. March 14th was my birthday, he said simply. I turned 29. The crash was later. I remember. I remember because I had the watch Eleanor gave me for my birthday in my pocket. The glass smashed when I hit the ground. It stopped at 3:14. 3:14 a.m. The time he woke up screaming every night. I looked at the accident report. Time of collision, 3:14 hours. Wait, no. The report said the crash was at night, but usually these trains ran. Let me check. I scanned the document again. The collision occurred at 0:27 hours. My heart sank. A discrepancy. 12:27 a.m. Not 3:14. Noah, the crash was at midnight, I said, almost pleadingly. It wasn't 3:14. Noah shook his head aggressively. No! The crash was midnight. I didn't die then. I was pinned. The steam, the coal. I lay there. I looked at the watch. I watched the hand move. It stopped when my heart stopped. 3:14. I died at 3:14, Elias. I lay in the dark for 3 hours waiting for them to find me. The horror of it hit me like a physical blow. The child wasn't waking up at the time of the crash. He was waking up at the time of death. The 3 hours of suffering. The slow fade into the dark. I looked at my son, my beautiful, innocent 5-year-old son, and I didn't see a child anymore. I saw a dying man trapped under tons of steel, watching a pocket watch count down his final moments. I have to go there, I said, the words leaving my mouth before I could stop them. Sarah looked at me. What? Winsford, I said, turning to her. I have to go to Winsford. I need to find the grave. I need to find Eleanor. Elias, that was 80 years ago, Sarah cried. She'd be dead. Then I'll find her grave too, I said, grabbing my passport from the desk drawer. Because if we don't fix this, he's never going to sleep again. And neither will we. The skeptic in me was dying. The detective was being born. The flight to Manchester was a blur of turbulence and stale coffee. I spent the 10 hours staring at the seat back in front of me, clutching a manila folder filled with printouts, the accident report, Noah's drawings, and a map of Cheshire, England. I had told my boss I was taking emergency leave for a family crisis. I wasn't lying. The crisis just wasn't the kind you could explain to HR. I rented a Vauxhall Astra at the airport and drove south. The landscape changed from the industrial grey of Manchester to the rolling, damp green of the countryside. It was raining here too. A fine, misty drizzle that clung to the windshield like oil. I arrived in Winsford just after 2 p.m. It was a town of red brick and grey slate, dissected by the River Weaver. It felt heavy with history, the kind of place where the past isn't just remembered, it's lived in. My first stop wasn't the graveyard. It was the Cheshire County Archives in Chester, 20 minutes away. I needed paper trails. I needed proof that wasn't filtered through the nightmares of a 5-year-old. The archivist was a woman named Mrs. Gable, A severe-looking woman with glasses on a chain who smelled of dust and peppermint. "The Winsford crash of '48?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "We have the local papers on microfilm. Row 4, Cabinet B." I sat in the darkened room, the hum of the microfilm reader the only sound. I scrolled through weeks of mundane news, church fates, livestock prices, post-war rationing updates. And then, there it was. The Winsford Chronicle, April 19, 1948. Tragedy on the line, 24 dead in rail disaster. I scanned the list of names. My fingers shook as it traced the grainy black ink. Among the crew, signalman Arthur Penhaligon, 29, of 14 Hawthorne Lane. A decorated veteran of the Royal Engineers, recently returned to service. Royal Engineers. Noah had never mentioned the army. But he had an obsession with bridges. He built them out of blocks, perfectly balanced. Structure. Just like me. I scrolled to the obituary section. Penhaligon Arthur. Beloved son of Thomas and Mary. Tragically taken. He leaves behind his grieving sister, Eleanor, 10, to whom he was a devoted guardian. Eleanor. The name Noah cried out in his sleep. She was 10. The same age difference Noah had with his imaginary sister. I printed the page, the machine whirring loudly. I needed more. I needed the watch. I asked Mrs. Gable if they held coroner's inquest reports. "Those are sealed for 75 years," she said, tapping her chin. "But 1948. Yes, they would be open now. But we don't keep the physical items. Those would have been returned to the family or auctioned." "I don't need the item," I said. "I need the inventory. The list of personal effects found on the body." It took 2 hours. 2 hours of digging through uncatalogued boxes in the basement. Finally, we found the folder. Case #48-992. I opened the yellowed envelope. Inside was a typed list. Leather wallet burnt. Brass railway key, Series 2. Silver pocket watch, inscribed to Arthur, love Ellie. Glass broken. Mechanism seized. Time on watch face, 3:14. I stopped breathing. The air in the basement felt suddenly thin. Time on watch face, 3:14. It wasn't a nightmare. It wasn't a coincidence. My son, born in Seattle in 2020, knew exactly what time a watch stopped in a field in England in 1948. I thanked Mrs. Gable, my voice sounding hollow, and walked out into the rain. I sat in the rental car and wept. I cried for Arthur. I cried for Noah. And I cried for the death of the world I thought I knew. But I wasn't done. I pulled out the obituary again. Survived by his sister, Eleanor. If she was 10 in 1948, she would be 87 now. It was a long shot. A desperate, impossible long shot. But I had to know. I used my phone to access the UK public records. Eleanor Penhaligon. Marriage record, 1958. To a James Vance. New name, Eleanor Vance. I searched the electoral roll. There were hundreds of Eleanor Vances. But only one in Cheshire. Eleanor Vance. The Willows Nursing Home, Winsford. She was still here. She never left. I drove back to Winsford. The nursing home was a converted Victorian manor on the outskirts of town. It looked peaceful, framed by weeping willow trees that dipped their branches into a pond. I walked to the reception desk. "I'm here to see Eleanor Vance," I said. I'm a distant relative. From America." The nurse looked at me skeptically. "Eleanor doesn't get many visitors. She has dementia, you know. She might not recognize you." "That's okay," I said. "I just want to say hello." She led me down a hallway that smelled of lavender and antiseptic. Room 12. The door was open. Sitting in an armchair by the window, staring out at the rain, was a tiny, frail woman. Her hair was white wisps, her skin like parchment paper. Her hands, gnarled with arthritis, rested on a knitted blanket. I stepped inside. "Eleanor?" She didn't move. "Mrs. Vance?" She turned her head slowly. Her eyes were cloudy, blue faded to gray. She looked at me with confusion. James? She rasped. No, I said, pulling a chair close. My name is Elias. I wanted to ask you about your brother. Her eyes sharpened instantly. The fog cleared for a microsecond. Arthur? Yes. Arthur. He's not here, she said, her voice trembling. He went to the box. He promised to come back for tea. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photo of Noah I had brought. A picture of him standing in our backyard, smiling, holding a toy train. I know this sounds crazy, Eleanor, I said gently. But I think he came back. She looked at the photo. She squinted. Then, she reached out a shaking hand and touched Noah's face in the picture. He has the mark, she whispered. I frowned. What? The mark, she said, pointing to her own chin. Arthur had a scar. Right here. From when he fell off his bike when he was 6. I froze. Noah didn't have a scar on his chin. My heart plummeted. I was wrong. It was all a coincidence. The watch, the time, the name, maybe I forced the pieces to fit. I felt a wave of crushing disappointment. No, I said softly. My son doesn't have a scar there. Eleanor looked up at me, her eyes suddenly lucid, terrifyingly sharp. Not a scar, young man. A dimple. A cleft chin. Only on the left side. I stopped. Noah did have a dimple. A deep, singular cleft on the left side of his chin. It was a genetic quirk. Neither Sarah nor I had it. We always joked it came from a great-grandfather. He has the dimple, I choked out. Eleanor smiled. It was a sad, beautiful smile. And does he whistle? She asked. Arthur couldn't whistle. He tried, but it always sounded like a dying kettle. I laughed, a wet, hysterical sound. Noah can't whistle. He gets frustrated and blows raspberries instead. Eleanor leaned back, closing her eyes. He didn't bring the doll, she whispered, a tear sliding down her cheek. He promised me a doll. A porcelain one. With a blue dress. I reached into my bag. I hadn't told Sarah why I bought it at the antique store in Seattle before I left. I saw it in the window and felt a compulsion I couldn't explain. I pulled out the small, vintage porcelain doll. It was chipped. It was old. But it wore a faded blue dress. I placed it in Eleanor's hands. Her eyes flew open. She looked at the doll, then at me. Her mouth opened in a silent scream of joy. She clutched it to her chest, rocking back and forth. He remembered, she sobbed. He didn't forget. I sat there, in the quiet room of a nursing home in England, watching an 87-year-old woman reunited with a promise made by a ghost. I wasn't a skeptic anymore. I wasn't just an engineer. I was a witness to a bridge that spanned something far wider than a river. I had found the proof. Now, I just had to bring them together. I called Sarah from the rental car in the nursing home parking lot. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the phone twice before I could dial. Pack a bag, I said when she answered. No preamble. No. Hello? Elias? What's going on? You sound. I found her, Sarah. I found his sister. She's alive. You have to bring him here. To Winsford. Tomorrow. There was a long silence on the other end. A normal wife would have argued. A normal wife would have asked about the cost, the time off school, the sheer insanity of flying a traumatized 5-year-old across the Atlantic on a hunch. But Sarah wasn't just a normal wife anymore. She was a mother watching her son fade away. We're on the red eye, she said. We'll be there. The reunion didn't happen at the airport. It happened on the road to Winsford. I picked them up from Manchester. Noah looked small in the back seat, clutching his stuffed dog. He had dark circles under his eyes. He hadn't slept through the night in months. As we drove south, the landscape began to open up, green fields, stone walls, the specific geometry of the English countryside. Noah, who had been lethargic, suddenly sat up. He pressed his face against the glass. "The bridge," he whispered. We were passing an old stone viaduct. "I helped point the mortar on arch number 4. Noah said, his voice devoid of the childish lisp he sometimes had. "It was leaning. We had to shore it up in 46. I looked at Sarah in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of fear and awe. She reached back and squeezed his hand. "We're almost there, Noah," I said. "We're going to see an old friend." The Willows nursing home seemed brighter today. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the world washed clean and vibrant. The sun was trying to break through the clouds, casting shafts of pale, golden light onto the wet pavement. I had arranged the visit with the head nurse, explaining it as a distant family reunion. I didn't tell her the truth. I couldn't. We walked down the lavender-scented hallway. The sound of our footsteps was the only noise, my heavy boots, Sarah's sneakers, and the light pat-pat-pat of Noah's Velcro shoes. When we reached room 12, I stopped. I knelt down in front of my son. "Noah," I said, putting my hands on his small shoulders. "There's a lady in here. Her name is Eleanor. Do you know who that is?" Noah stopped breathing for a second. His eyes, usually so full of confusion and borrowed pain, suddenly cleared. It was like watching a fog lift from a harbor. He stood straighter. He didn't look like a 5-year-old. He looked dignified. "Ellie," he breathed. "Is she still angry about the doll?" "No," I choked out, fighting back tears. "She's not angry. She's just waiting." I opened the door. Eleanor was in her chair, facing the window again. The doll I had given her was sitting in her lap, her gnarled hands resting protectively over it. "Eleanor?" I said softly. She turned. Her gaze drifted past me, past Sarah, and locked onto the small boy standing in the doorway. The room went silent. A silence so heavy, so profound, it felt like the air had been sucked out. Noah didn't run to her like a child runs to a grandmother. He walked. He walked with a slow, deliberate gait, his hands clasped behind his back, a gesture I had never seen him do, but one that looked hauntingly like an old man inspecting a station. He stopped 2 feet from her chair. He was eye level with her as she sat. Eleanor stared at him. Her dementia, the fog that stole her days, seemed to recede completely in the face of this impossible reality. She looked at his eyes. Not the face, but the eyes. "You're late," Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking. Noah smiled. It wasn't Noah's smile. It was a crooked, weary, apologetic smile. "The 404 was running heavy, Ellie," Noah said softly. "And the signal stuck." Eleanor let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. She reached out a trembling hand. Noah took it. His small, unblemished hand engulfed by her wrinkled, paper-thin skin. "You're so small," she said, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "You're just a baby." "I had to come back," Noah said, stepping closer and resting his head on her knee, exactly as a tired older brother might lean against a wall. "I couldn't leave you alone. I promised." "You missed my wedding," she cried softly, stroking his hair. "You missed everything, Arthur." "I know," Noah whispered. "I washed. I saw you. You looked beautiful in the lace. But I couldn't shout loud enough for you to hear me." Sarah was sobbing silently in the doorway, her hand pressed hard against her mouth to stifle the sound. I put my arm around her, holding her up, because I felt like my own legs were about to give way. This wasn't science. This wasn't engineering. This was love. A love so stubborn, so fierce, it had clawed its way back from the grave, traveled across an ocean, and defied the laws of biology just to say goodbye. They sat like that for an hour. They didn't speak much more. They just held hands. Noah hummed a tune, a strange, lilting melody I had never heard. "That's the White Cliffs of Dover," Eleanor murmured, her eyes closing. "You used to whistle that when you walked me to school." "I can't whistle anymore," Noah said simply. "My lips don't work the same." Eventually, Noah pulled away. He looked tired. Not the terrified exhaustion of the nightmares, but a good, clean tiredness. The work was done. I have to go now, Ellie, he said. To the box? She asked, fear flickering in her eyes. No. He shook his head. Not to the box. Just home. I'm Noah now. I have a dad. And a mom. He pointed to us. Eleanor looked at us. Her eyes were full of gratitude. Take care of him, she said fiercely. He worries too much. And make sure he eats his peas. He always hated peas. We will, I promised. Noah leaned in and kissed her cheek. Goodbye, Ellie. Sleep tight. Good night, Arthur, she whispered. We didn't go straight to the airport. There was one last stop. St. Chad's Churchyard. The Over Cemetery. It was dusk. The sky was a bruised purple, the sun dipping below the horizon. We found the stone easily. It was weathered, covered in lichen, but the inscription was clear. Arthur Penhaligon, 1919 to 1948. Duty before self. Noah stood in front of the grave. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He looked at the stone with a strange curiosity, like he was looking at an old house he used to live in. He reached out and touched the cold stone. It's okay now, he said to the dirt. I'm not down there anymore. I'm up here. He turned to me. The shadows that had haunted his face for months were gone. His eyes were bright. They were the eyes of a 5-year-old boy. Can we go home, Daddy? He asked. I'm hungry. I want a burger. I picked him up, swinging him into my arms. He felt lighter. The weight of the dead man was gone. Yeah, buddy, I said, kissing his forehead. Let's go get a burger. 6 months later. The nightmares never came back. Not once. Noah is 6 now. He loves swimming. He jumps into the pool with a reckless abandon that terrifies Sarah. The phobia of water vanished the moment we left England. He doesn't draw trains anymore. He draws spaceships. Sometimes, when the house is quiet, I look at him and wonder how much he remembers. Does he still recall the smell of coal? The scream of the steam? Or has it faded, like a dream upon waking? Last week, I was fixing a leaky faucet in the kitchen. Noah walked in, holding a toy robot. He watched me struggle with the wrench. Righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, Dad, he chirped. I smiled. Thanks, Noah. He paused, tilting his head. And don't force the thread. If you force it, you strip the bolt. Gentle hands. I froze. I looked at him. He grinned, a flash of a dimple on his left cheek, the dimple that shouldn't be there. Then he shrugged and ran off to the living room, making laser noises. I turned back to the sink. The water was clear. The pipes held. The structure was sound. I am a structural engineer. I believe in what I can see, what I can measure, what I can calculate. But I also know now that the foundation of the world is deeper than bedrock. We are built on stories. And sometimes, just sometimes, the story doesn't end when the book closes.